Alright, so the revolution begins. As we left off in our last video, Louis the XVI has called together the Estates General to vote on the tax that he had suggested for the Second Estate or the nobility. So the meeting of the Estates General began in 1789, and it began with an argument over how to count the votes. The old regime and the Estates General had been around since the Middle Ages, and so these rules have been around since the Middle Ages as well. And under the old medieval rules, each estate met in a separate hall. They would decide on how they would vote on the matter, and then they would cast their vote as one single block. That way, the first estate got one vote, the second estate got one vote, and the third estate, which remember, 97% of the French population makes up the third estate, would also only get one vote. So, how would you think that the privileged estates would vote on this suggested tax on this second estate? How do you think the third estate would vote? As you can probably guess, and what often happened was that the privileged estates, or the first and second estate, would always outvote the third estate, and the third estate did not like this. They wanted more of a one person, one vote type of deal. The third estate they wanted everyone to meet together in one hall and vote one person, one vote, because the third estate had as many delegates as the first and second estate did combined. Therefore, the chance of having that tax pass on the second estate would increase under this new way of voting. Unfortunately for the third estate, Louis XVI decided to side with the first and second estates and keep the method of voting that were created during the medieval time. And the third estate, being frustrated at this early loss, as far as challenging the old way of voting, got some help, and there was a suggestion that went out that the third estate decided that they should rename themselves the National Assembly and start to meet and pass laws and reforms in the name of the French people. Many of the members of the of the third estate, or the bourgeoisie, being inspired by those ideas and virtues of the Enlightenment, decided to take up this challenge, and on June 17th, 1789, after a long night of voting and deliberation, they decided to rename themselves the National Assembly, and they began to pass laws and reforms in the name of the French people. This, in effect, was the beginning of the end of having an absolute monarch in France, and it was seen as the first deliberate act of the French Revolution. So, we have the beginning of the end of the absolute monarchy in France, and we have the start of a representative government in France with the creation of the National Assembly. Unfortunately for the National Assembly, 3 days later, on June 20th, 1789, they found themselves locked out of their assembly hall. Not to be discouraged, they found and broke down the door of an indoor tennis court. And there they decided to not come out and not break the meeting until they had drawn up a new constitution. This pledge not to break from the meeting until a new constitution was drawn is known as the Tennis Court Oath. The National Assembly, now that we have the Tennis Court Oath and this pledge to stay until a new constitution was drawn up, also started to gain the support of some of the clergy and the nobility that favored reform. In response to this tennis court oath, in response to this deliberate act of insubordination by the National Assembly, Louis XVI responded to this growing tension by calling up his mercenary guards. Mercenaries are hired out foreign soldiers, and so he called up his mercenary guards, the Swiss guards, to come and protect and surround the Palace of Versailles. So what was the result of response by Louis the XVI, calling up the Swiss guards to surround Versailles. Well, rumors begin to swirl around France. Some believe that Louis the XVI had called up the Swiss guards to use force to dismiss the National Assembly. Others believe that the king had called up the mercenaries to massacre French citizens. So regardless, French citizens began to feel the need that they had to arm themselves to protect, in order to protect themselves from this king and from the French government. And so on July 14th, 1789, French citizens stormed the Bastille, Bastille, the Bastille, which was a Paris prison. They did this in order to get arms and weapons, so they would have a chance to defend themselves against this supposed attack by the French king and his mercenaries. July 14th, 1789, the French citizens stormed the Bastille. They kill a couple guards, cut off their heads and place them on stakes and march around with them. And they gather up the weapons and the arms that the prison had been holding. This is known as Bastille Day, and ever since then, July 14th has always had a huge symbolic meaning for the French people, where this was the beginnings of their revolution, or the beginnings of the third estate of the French citizens rising up and challenging the structure of authority and government that had been in place during the old regime. It is similar in some aspects to our July 4th and our own Independence Day. Another result of this growing tension was this senseless panic that started to occur among the French citizens, which will become known as the Great Fear. There were some rumors swirling around that the French nobility were beginning to hire outlaws to massacre French peasants, and so this senseless panic started to break out, and the French peasants became outlaws themselves. They destroyed manor homes. They went to the French nobility, burned down the manors, destroyed old feudal papers, requiring the peasants to work on the land of the nobles. They even, stormed the Palace of Versailles, killing a couple of guards and demanding of the king and the queen a couple things. They demanded that the National Assembly provided bread for the French citizens. They demanded that Louis and Marie Antoinette return to Paris so they could confront these problems head on. And that's what they did. Louis and Marie Antoinette left the Versailles Palace, en route to Paris, and unfortunately for them, they would never return to Versailles. And the Great Fear really is what the French Revolution is going to be in a nutshell. Rumors that cause panic, which in turn creates violent outlashes or outbreaks, among certain segments of French society. And we'll see this occur again and again, unfortunately, as the French Revolution unfolds. So, the National Assembly, in August of 1789, will start to take some steps to change or to reform France. August 4th is an important date in the history of the French Revolution. This is when members of the nobility will start to make these grand speeches, more out of fear than out of idealism or the ideas of the Enlightenment, talking about their love of democracy and liberty and equality. And by the next morning, laws were put into place that took away the privileged status of the first and second estates and made them equal to the commoners of the third estate. And so, as a result of these new laws and these new reforms, the old regime was dead in France, and we start to see steps, being taken to create a more democratic French society. 3 weeks later, the National Assembly will take some more steps to change France. 3 weeks later, they created a document known as the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, and reflecting the influence of America's Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen stated that men are born and remain free and equal in rights. These rights included liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression or being put down. The document also guaranteed citizens equal justice, freedom of speech, and freedom of religion. And so in keeping with these principles, you will see that the revolutionary leaders will create a slogan, or will become the official slogan of the French Revolution, which would be, the slogan is liberty, equality, and fraternity. And fraternity, brotherhood or togetherness. And we will start to see, even more changes in the next coming months that the Assembly is going to work on to create a new government. And some of these laws will affect the church, and some of these other laws will affect Louis XVI and his status as monarch. All right, so a lot of these new laws focused on the church. The National Assembly took some steps to challenge the power and wealth of the First Estate, or the Roman Catholic Church. The first thing that they did was to declare that all church officials and priests were to be elected officials. This is going to cause the Catholic Church to lose their status as an independent entity in France. Now they're going to be part of the state instead of separation of church and state. This will anger some of the French peasants who are overwhelmingly Catholic, and they said that the Pope should be ahead of the church and not the French government. And so you'll start to see that even though some of these ideas are in line with the Enlightenment, these peasants will no longer support some of these reforms brought on by the French Revolution or by the National Assembly. A lot of these matters that the National Assembly took against the church were largely economic. In taking the church's land, they could thereby sell the land off and using that money from the sale of the land to help whittle down the debt. So we do see some steps taken by the National Assembly to limit the power and influence of the church, and also take care of the debt. When Louis saw that these new plans were being put into place to restructure the church, he started to worry about his status as the French monarch. And to exacerbate the situation, he also had some of his advisors telling him that it was no longer safe for him to be in France. And so in 1791, we've been around for 2 years now, the National Assembly has been making some changes to the French government. In 1791, in the middle of the night, the French royal family decided to try to sneak out of France and into the Australian, the Austrian, mountains. However, as a picture shows on the PowerPoint, they were caught at the border and forced to return back to Paris. This will allow this act of trying to leave leave France in the middle of the night, will allow some of the enemies and more of the radical portions or factions of the National Assembly to seal the fate of Louis XVI in diminishing his power and his role of French monarch, and in turn increase their agenda, which would be, like I said, they're more radical, and so increase their agenda for more civic participation in the French government. When we come back in the next segment, we will look at some of these divisions that were starting to develop in the National Assembly and the creation of a new assembly known as the Legislative Assembly. And we will look at some of the wars and executions that took place in the coming years as the French Revolution takes a more violent and radical turn. All right, so stay tuned to some of the next videos in which we will discuss those changes.